Okay, I think we're ready to get started. We're almost at 100 people. Thank you guys so much for joining us this evening. My name is Maria Butz Sorensen. I'm a project manager with DVDL, and together with the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund, as well as
Maria, you're muted.
Oh, wow. Was I muted the whole time? Okay. Interesting. Okay. You hear me now, I hope.
Yes.
Great. I'm going to try again. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're almost reached 100 people at this point, which is very exciting. My name is Maria Butz Sorensen, and I'm a project manager with DVDL. We're an agency of cultural forecasters and strategists based in New York. And we're excited to have been contracted by the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund for this project on activating Jacksonville's Riverfront. And we're working together with Groundwork Jacksonville as well and WXY. And you'll hear a lot more from them all later. But first, yeah, just again, thank you so much for being here this evening and spending time with us. I know that there's several other community events happening. So we really appreciate that you're here and your interest in the Riverfront. So just a few kind of housekeeping items before we get going. First of all, you're all going to be muted for the first portion of the meeting. We will have time for questions at the end, and we'll have people unmute and speak at that point. But for now, please just keep yourself on mute. We do encourage that you introduce yourself using the chat. We'd love to see who's here. You can put in your name if you want to put in your affiliation. And also we would like to hear where in the city, or if you're from in another city than Jacksonville, where you're calling in from today. So feel free to introduce yourself using the chat. So as I said, we'll be taking questions at the end. We'll have people raise their hand and unmute at that point, and I'll explain how that works when we get there. I also want to let everyone know that there's closed captioning is available. If you hover over your screen, you should see a button that says live transcript in the Zoom software. So you can turn on closed captioning there. If you go to live transcript settings, you will also be able to increase or decrease the font size of the transcript. One other thing, we will, in order for you to in the best possible way see the speakers, you can choose the speaker view on your screen. That will be the best way for you to keep track on who's speaking. If you do have any tech issues, we have Mark from the fund here tonight, and he is named Tech Support, Mark. So if you find him in the chat, you can private chat him if you're having any issues with audio or anything else, and he will try to guide you through the chat. And then finally, this meeting is being recorded, and we'll make the recording available after the meeting. And I think that's it for the housekeeping items. So we can get going. So I'm just going to walk you guys through the agenda for this evening. So in a minute, I'm going to hand it over to Mari from the fund to welcome you all and introduce the work that they do and how we got to this project that we're at today. Then David from DVDL will take over, and he will introduce himself and the firm. And Mari and David will then have a conversation, a dialogue around public space and why it's so important to have good designed and good and well activated public spaces. David will then take us through the presentation of the project, kind of the reason why we're all here today. Later in the program, we'll introduce Gloria McNair and Katie Ensign from Gloria from Groundwork and Katie from the fund, and they will have a conversation about the community involvement and engagement throughout this process and the kind of activities that are planned. David will then take us through the next steps for the project, and then very importantly, we'll go over opportunities for how you can all get involved, which we're very excited about. And then finally, we'll go to questions at the end. So that's kind of what's in store for you this evening. So I'm going to hand it over to Mari.
And as we move on to that, Maria, in terms of questions and answers, should people start, if they have questions, like put them in the chat, or how do you want people to be thinking about that?
Yeah, if you have comments throughout or questions, you can definitely use the chat actively, but we will at the end have people actually pose their questions verbally if they want to. But yeah, if you feel more comfortable using the chat, you can do that as well, and we'll try to take a few questions from there as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Maria, for that introduction. I'm Mari Qureshi of the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund, and I am so pleased to see so many of you here. I know it's been a full workday and you're all logging on yet another Zoom call, and I am so grateful. Just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of why the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund is engaged in this conversation. One of the things that the staff at the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund, as well as the trustees and I, engaged in when I joined the fund in 2019 was to try and figure out, what is the essence of Mrs. DuPont's legacy for the fund. And we recognize that Mrs. DuPont loved certain places, among them Jacksonville, and that is manifest in her grant making, but also in the way she chose to, sort of dictate her last wishes. She was an educator. She could have said, I believe in education. You should educate as many people as possible. But that is not what she chose to do. And so we have, in a little bit of jargon of the philanthropy world, chosen to focus on placemaking, but placemaking in as inclusive a way as possible. We want to create places that are as inclusive as possible because we think that the greatest diversity of interests, background, and experiences will create the greatest prosperity for the places that Jesse Ball DuPont loved. So that's a little bit about the theoretical reason why we're engaged. The practical reason as to why we're engaged is that this turned out to be a great opportunity to partner and contribute to the city. We are working very closely with various departments in the city, as well as with civic groups in the city, to figure out what do we want to do on this great waterfront that we have in downtown Jacksonville, specifically stretching from Memorial Park on the north bank to the east, Metropolitan Park, and the south bank comprising Baptist and the district water line. And what we are most engaged in is to talk to as many different segments of Jacksonville society as possible to figure out what you all would like to do and experience on the water, on this great waterfront. We can't all have beautiful riverfront homes, but we can make the downtown water line accessible to as many people as possible. And we want to figure out what you all want to do and engage in a little game of Tetris to figure out how we can fit all of those pieces together so that we can have a waterfront that we can all enjoy. We're particularly focused on what will it take to not just create great places, but to maintain and activate those places. So that's why you see in all of our literature activating the Jacksonville waterfront. So that's a little bit about why we're engaged and why we're so excited about this opportunity and why these public fora are so important to us. I'm now going to turn it over to David. Actually, one last administrative thing. If you try to figure, if you've see a sea of faces at this point, 125 faces, and you can't figure out who's actually associated with this project, we've all put an asterisk in front of our name. So if you see one of those names, you can figure out if you want to message us or anything, that's how you can identify us. And now I'm going to turn it over to David.
Good. Thank you, Mari, for the introduction, as well as Maria for all the hard work on getting this meeting together. Good to see many familiar names in the chat, as well as lots of new names. So great to meet you. I'm David Wendeleer, and I run an agency out of New York. And as Maria mentioned earlier, we're strategists and cultural forecasters. Our clients sit on two sides. On the one side, cultural institutions, especially museums, and on the other side, a lot of public space related work, like we're doing in Jacksonville, which we're very excited about. Most of our work is focused on, basically what does it mean to be in spaces, whether they're museums, public spaces, what does it mean to be together? So we do tons of cultural analysis, and all of our work is focused on human behavior. You see two projects here of the last years. Nelson Atkins, we've been advising on some of their strategies to think through content, but also public. And longer ago, in one of my previous lives, I developed a lab for the Guggenheim, where I was a curator. And that lab was an urban think tank that moved around the world in its own building, looking at all types of urban issues, and still an exciting and interesting project that's partially a reference for the work that we're doing here. On the next slide, yes, just a few things that we've been involved in. I won't talk you through all of these, but to give you a sense, they range from projects like a large downtown master plan for West Palm Beach a few years ago, through my old organization, Van Allen Institute, thinking through memorials for the future with the National Capital Planning Commission in DC, super interesting project, and partially inspiring for the work that we're doing with all of you. Two museums, such as natural history museums, pop museums, and we're currently thinking through what it means to develop partnerships for the Guggenheim, my old home base. So interesting to think about all these types of ways of engaging people, thinking through what it means to bring people to either institutions or bring people to public spaces. And pleased to do this also in the context of Jacksonville. What we were hoping to do is spend a few minutes chatting between Maria and myself, which I feel we have been doing for months, and to help you think a little bit more through like what and how. And Mari already gave a great introduction, and as you probably know, Mari started at the funds a little around 2 years ago, and has been working through substantial change with the fund, the Chesapeake Boulder Funds Fund. And I've been very intrigued by all of that change. And I've been wondering, like, why as an organization you say, like, you're so interested in being involved in Jacksonville and making it a great place. But why is it important that cities become great places for people to live in? No trick questions, by the way.
Yes, yes. Why is it important that city become great places? Well, for one thing, there is a global urbanization trend happening. More and more cities, more and more people are living in cities. There's a much higher probability today than even 10, 20, 50 years ago that someone you encounter in the world will be living in a city. So I think the art and science of creating great cities is something that we all need to pay attention to. Second, we are a fund that is that was created by and governed by the last will and testament of Jessie Baldepont. And so she had particular places that she cared about. One of the clauses of the will states that we can give for the temporary relief of people in need in Virginia, Delaware, and Florida. And within Florida, Jacksonville was clearly very important to her. And so in our desire to really fulfill the terms of the will, creating an incredible place to live, play, and work in Jacksonville seems like a pretty good extension of her intent.
Absolutely. And then, of course, you've been doing different things in different places around the city in the last few years. But in this case, a very strong focus on the downtown riverfronts, north and south. And we'll talk you through the actual geographic area in a minute. But then the question is, why the riverfronts? There would have been so many other things to do also, but why the riverfronts?
Well, really, why the riverfront and why downtown, right? The downtown part is truly because my predecessor, Cherry McGill, made this bold investment in the building that is now the Jesse Ball DuPont Center, but formerly the public library downtown, which, as you have seen recently, is a mid-century modern gem. And that investment was intended to catalyze a kind of stickiness to downtown by creating an amazing place for nonprofits to have working office space in. So there's a track record of the fund getting engaged in downtown and being a stakeholder downtown. We are a big landlord in downtown, so we care. It's as much. We want a vibrant downtown, not just for ourselves, but for our tenants. And we believe that a vibrant downtown is core to a city as spread out as Jacksonville is. In some sense, you have to be a suburb of somewhere. And therefore, why not invest in downtown? It is also an amazing waterfront. There are so many cities in the world that have capitalized on bodies of water that are far less impressive than the St. Johns River. So to me, it feels like $100 bill on the sidewalk. You must pick it up.
Love that. That's a good reference. I think that was it for my questions for now, Mari.
So I'm going to turn the tables and ask you about some of your experience working on public spaces. And you were a curator at the Guggenheim Lab, and you worked at Van Allen, and now you're at DVDL. What are the lessons that you might be able to sort of crystallize for us, specifically related to waterfront public spaces?
Yeah, it's a nice one. And it's already something that I mentioned on the slide with the intro. In all the work over the years, whether it was with museums or in public spaces and parks and riverfronts, or an overlap of all of those, I realized it's very important for us as societies to start focusing on three things especially. One is on people. Especially after last year, I think we can all confirm that we like being around each other in some shape or form, all in different ways, but people are incredibly important. Next to that, ideas and impacts, so important, right? And there's so much opportunity to use public spaces, not only to meet each other, but also to learn from each other, to learn like what makes people tick, what could be a big ideas that move us forward. And very importantly, public spaces, in my mind, are also the ultimate place to think through what is the impact that we want to have as societies moving forward. And as you're describing the waterfront, and it will, I'm sure, come up several times during our meeting today, of course, it also means thinking around issues of rising seawater levels, impact of hurricanes, and so on, and all the resiliency work that it comes with. So ideas, impact, and people, yeah, for me are key when we're thinking about public spaces, park spaces, and waterfronts.
So it sounds a little bit like, with great opportunity like the St. Johns River, come also some risks like flooding. And it takes a sort of multidisciplinary approach to think about, how do you bring this all together, and how do you create an urban experience, both, all the way from like, how do you get to work, to how do you, get your groceries, to how do you maintain your health, how do you maintain your mental health, like, how can we design around this great asset in a sustainable way? What are the ways we should be thinking about this? You've no doubt talked to, landscape architects, neuroscientists, artists. What are the ways that this all comes together?
Well, there's many ways to answer this question, right? It's a big one. But perhaps what we should linger on for a moment is the mental aspect and what it means to be in public spaces, and especially in green spaces like parks. Over the years, I've made several projects, research projects, with the folks you're describing now, neuroscientists, all types of people thinking about the brain. And I've been super intrigued by that. We want to learn more about that. We don't know enough about the brain as it is. But what we do know is that we get deeply, deeply impacted by the spaces that we inhabit. And it varies from the buildings that we're in on a daily basis, from our houses to our offices to public buildings that we all use. But also, very importantly, the public spaces. They have a giant impact on how we behave and how we feel. And I can give you two sample projects, just as an indication. Years ago, I developed an interesting project in collaboration with Cloud Lab at Columbia University. This was a project here in New York, in Dumbo, so in Brooklyn, under the Brooklyn, basically between the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge. And for weeks and weeks on end, we had people walk around, always with a set itinerary with brain sensors on their foreheads. Which meant that we could track exactly what was happening in their brains and map that out against what was happening in the city. And of course, there were many conclusions that came out of it. But one of the conclusions was, and you may know this intuitively or sense this when you're going around the city, but we get anxious on street corners, and especially if there's a lot of noise involved. But our brains tell our bodies like, no, just do your thing, like it's all fine. Even though our heart rate is spiking, we start to sweat a little bit more than we would usually do when we're just walking on a normal block. So we get impacted by that street corner. Yet we design street corners largely the same as we design the city block. But it could be an indication to design things slightly differently, or to allow for us to behave a little differently. On that same note, I have to think of a project well, it was actually a global project, but the main collaboration was with a team in London for King's College, great university there. And this was a neuroscience-led team. And we hosted a project around how I wanted to know like the extreme examples of how we get impacted by the city that we live in, and park spaces also. And what we did is we focused on addiction. How could addiction be fed by cities? And we didn't speak so much, it was not the goal to figure out like what are spaces people end up shooting up in, for instance, but more like how does extreme behavior get pushed by the city? And this was a fascinating big project. And one of the outcomes was that green spaces linger in our brains. They have a positive impact on how we feel, what we think. They make us calmer. But that impact only lasts for several hours. It's 2.5 hours, I believe. And after that, it evaporates again, and you basically have to recharge. Well, there's many things you can say about that, but one of the things is, of course, like, okay, we need to be sure that we have more green spaces in the city, we use them more frequently, and perhaps, also lots of spaces in unexpected parts of the city. So yeah, to me, super interesting to learn all this stuff about the brain and the city and parks.
That's fascinating. I would also love to see research on what do our brains do when we see large bodies of water, such as the St. Johns River, right?
I think it's largely similar, but it's a good question. The research didn't focus on that, but I have a feeling very similar.
Yeah, that's great. So when we talk about activation, what we're really saying is we want to create experiences and things to do at the river so that people come and spend time. They don't just pass through, you know, it's a destination. It's a destination to do something or to get something. What are some of the sort of activities that we perhaps might not think about when we think kind of in the abstract about activation? And how does the community benefit from some of those things?
That is a trick question. No, it's an interesting one. There could be so many answers right here. But I want to go back to my earliest point, is that public spaces, park spaces, are potentially what makes cities great. But they, in my mind, only work when people actually use them. So you need to be sure that people come out for them, that people join, that people see them as their spaces, feel a sense of ownership over them. But it means, as you indicate, that we need to get people out there. People need to feel that they can come. So activating is important, but activating is not only about fun programs. I will give you a few in a minute, but I do think it's also incredibly important to think through, like, how do you set up for large and small scale things to happen? So for groups and individuals, for formal and informal, temporary and permanent. We'll talk more about that today, but it cannot all be big events, obviously, right? And then, of course, it's not only about cooking up interesting, fun events, but also like who pays for them, who manages them, who gets people to come out there. So all those aspects are important too. Then to get to your actual question about some fun, surprising things to happen in public and green spaces. Things that I always like are about the senses. The senses are something, they're so cool, right? They make us people. And over the years, I made different projects about the senses. One of my favorites was a project about noise and silence here in New York City. And we organized tons of projects in different boroughs, always with deep community input about what does it mean to take a step back and sometimes be quiet. And wonderful projects, from urban therapy sessions to storytelling exercises and so on. And then to go back to that lab that I mentioned earlier on, that's moved around the world in its own building, from New York to Berlin to Mumbai. We did tons of urban experiments there, sometimes like with brain sensors, like I described earlier, but people love being a part of like something that they know can make their cities better. And if it's in an interactive experimental setting, it can be very interesting and fun. And then the last one, perhaps, and it's largely because we come out of a bizarre year of COVID, is I hosted a program years ago that was all about empathy, and we wanted to track like what actually generates feelings of empathy in the body and the mind. And we had people like hug throughout the event. Well, you cannot imagine doing that now in a big event, but there were a few hundred people hugging throughout the evening. And the positive impact that a simple hug had on people's mood and activity, yeah, that was great to see. So it's good that we can start hugging again.
A group hug sounds really good right now.
Absolutely. Good. And any more, Mari?
No, I think that's it. I think we might want to turn over to the community engagement dimension of the work, because Groundwork is working closely with us to reach out to all the different communities. And so I think Gloria McNair from Groundwork and Katie Enstein, you're up.
Great. Well, thank you, Mari. And hi, Gloria.
Hello, Katie.
And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. The last time that Gloria and I worked together, we were actually on the river and looking at riverfront parks from the river itself, which was a very interesting perspective. And Gloria will tell you a little bit more about some opportunities to do that. And I encourage you to do so. But at the Jessie Ball DuPont Fund and DVDL, we are just thrilled to be working with Groundwork Jax on really this community engagement, which we consider to be the key to these public processes. We think that community engagement and community feedback is what absolutely drives what people want in the cities that they live, work, and play in. And so we want to try to create together, all of us, as many opportunities to have people give input on what it is that they want on the riverfront, how they want to get there, how they want to use it, what they want to see when they get there, how they want to feel, as we've been talking about. And so Gloria is our, and Groundwork Jacks is our partner in making sure that that happens. And you know, we know that activating the riverfront, I mean, for any of you that have walked on the riverfront, you know there are times when it's really busy and times when it's really not. And, you know, imagine what we could do there, and imagine the kinds of stories that we can highlight about Jacksonville, and ways that we can connect with each other, which we need more than ever right now. And so obviously, I'm sure all of you know about Groundwork Jacks, but they are a trust, and they're dedicated to creating a more walkable, livable community. And Gloria, I'll let you talk about Groundwork Jacks and what they do, and, you know, particularly, of course, about the Emerald Trail, which is an integral part of this whole conversation.
I will speak briefly about Groundwork Jacksonville. We are the city's nonprofit partner in designing and building the Emerald Trail. This is a 30-mile dedicated pedestrian trail and linear park system that will connect 15 urban neighborhoods, including downtown to the river, and our two gyms, Hogan's Creek and McCoy's Creek, and both of those creeks will be going through a restoration process. The trail will also directly link to 16 schools, 2 colleges, and 21 parks. It's going to be a transformative project directing millions of dollars in green infrastructure improvements and economic development to our urban neighborhoods that have been largely neglected for decades. We know that connected communities are healthier communities. And we just talked about the health benefits, and most definitely the mental health benefits, especially during the time of COVID and even afterwards. And so the trail will connect citizens from all areas of town and provide people an opportunity to enjoy nature, exercise, and to see parts of town that they've never seen before. Groundwork is engaging along the trail to include the partners in the design. That's been so key to our progress so far. Community engagement is at the core of what we do. We want to ensure that residents currently living along the trail have a say in its design, are not displaced, and sharing the prosperity that will create for our city. And that's one of the reasons I was really excited about joining this project, because it's so connected to what we're doing already with the community engagement and touching on communities where we've already established great connections.
Thanks, Gloria. That's, as the expert in community engagement, I just want to ask you a little bit about why you think it's so important to involve the public, and you have extensive experience in this with the Emerald Trail, but when you think about the Riverfront Activation Plan, and then what are some ways that you are specifically doing that?
Okay, I think Mari and David have already said how important community engagement is. You cannot build it and just think, oh, they will come. We build it, here they are. People want to belong to a process. They want to see things that they enjoy doing. And the only way we'll know what our residents want is by asking them, giving them the opportunity to have that input. Jacksonville has such a diverse group of residents, and it would be a shame not to take advantage of everything that folks have to offer. Now, we started out with our community engagement revolving around our river taxi tours, which we've had 3 of them. They've been successful. We have waiting lists. I'm sorry if you were not able to get on the boat. I think if we can manage it, we may add a couple of extra taxi tours. but they've been very exciting. We tried to make them fun. They're 90-minute tours. We do have 2 more that are actually scheduled. We have one this Saturday is booked. Sorry. And we have one on May 29th, which is also booked. I'm sorry. It's just, that's why we're, they're very popular, and people find them enjoyable. And I actually see a few names, a few people are in the meeting who I recognize from our tours. And so we stop at Metro Park. I just want to share this with you because we have a couple of different activities that we do, but it's a visioning type of event at Metro Park where I ask people to dream and dream big. And I get this from David. I want people to dream. And I want them to forget about any other projects that have taken place. We've seen so many designs, so many plans for the riverfront, and I ask people to be selfish and think about what they want to do, what's fun for them. If they're having fun and they're with their family, it's been a couple of years, they've had input into the design process or telling people what they want. So what do they see when they look around? And for me, I thought about it for myself, and I thought, what would I see, just kind of like dreaming about it. And my family would be there at the riverfront. And that's what most of our folks say. It's a family affair. It's either family and friends. And my daughters would be there. One is interested in the arts, so she may be there at a restored amphitheater, and there's a dance troupe performing. My husband is at the riverfront there at one of the piers fishing. I'm sitting on a bench reading a book on my Kindle. And my other daughter is visiting from college. She's brought a couple of friends with her, and they're shopping because her friends want some souvenirs to take back to the Gulf Coast. And so very real experiences. And then we're going to meet later on. This is in the morning, and we're going to meet around brunch time and at one of the many eateries, our little pop-ups, and we're going to enjoy that. And those are the type of responses similar that we get from our people who take the tour. They are interested in connecting with others. They want to walk. They want the 2 parks to be connected. And that's just some of the feedback that we've gotten. And I just want to share that with you. We do have some other events planned other than the tours, because they are kind of, if you can only take 50 people, so that's kind of limiting, right? Oh, I see people throwing it, eating at the sweet spot. I like that one. I'm looking at the chat, I'm sorry. So on Sunday, May 23rd, this Sunday coming, we are going to have a Sunset Riverwalk tour. We're going to begin at 5:30 at Intuition Ale. And then we'll take off in small groups, and we'll walk from Intuition Ale down to the former courthouse, to the courthouse yards there. We'll visit one of the piers. People will have a chance to do some visioning. Then you can come back to Intuition Ale. All of the walk should take about an hour. And when you return, we'll have some activities, have a chance to talk about what you want to do. It's a whole totally different perspective from being on a boat to actually walking on the riverfront on the street. Just to share, we will have some food there. We decided that people walk, they may want some beverages and want something to eat, but it's going to be a great event. I am sure of it, because we have so many residents who are interested in this riverfront activation planning. Other events include, and we have several of them, and they keep adding each day because we want to talk to as many people as possible. So on June 8th, we're going to have a community meeting at the Ritz Theater. We're going to have a big outdoor event, so then we can accommodate more people. We're calling it Kicking, and it's kicking, not kicking it on the river. And we'll have a DJ. People will be able to enjoy different activities. It's going to be a family event. Have the kids come out. We'll have something for them to do. We're also incorporating a few water taxi tours during that time frame. And that's you'll see more about it. It's going to begin at 11 a.m. and last until 2 p.m. And that's on June 12th. We're also going to be at the Melanin Market. That's out east, and that's the Juneteenth celebration. Hopefully, we'll be doing some surveys out there on that day, and we'll just be talking to people about what they want to see at the riverfront. The out east group is they're within walking distance of the area, and I'm sure they have plans about what they would like to see. I know some of the gentlemen would like to fish again. Another community meeting will be with the Newtown group in partnership with the Newtown Success Zone. I'm happy to say that because they allowed us to work with them on this. That will be on June 22nd at 5:30 to 7 o'clock p.m. And it will be at the Milne Auditorium. And I forgot to mention our first community meeting, and Suzanne Pickett is in the meeting too. She'll be upset with me. That is on May 26th. And it's involving the Out East and the Springfield communities. We're inviting them out to engage in some visioning exercises and just have some good conversations, because I think that group will be a good place to start, because they're already talking about some of the things that have come up in our groups about inclusivity and connecting communities. And I think it's going to be wonderful there as well. And I may not have mentioned your neighborhood, but we do have other community meetings that will be planned in the San Marco Riverside community. Arlington residents can look forward to hearing about a meeting in their area. And we plan something at the Winston Family YMCA, try to get some of our next gen folks involved. And I feel like I've just said a whole lot.
That's great. And now we have all of your email addresses, so you will receive all of this information in writing too. You'll
Yes.
be invited. So hope that you'll take advantage of it. And Gloria, I just want to thank you and Groundwork so much for this community engagement. It's really exciting, and the ideas and thoughts and input is really fascinating and very different from many of the plans that many of us have seen over many years. So I think it's really exciting. And I think now, David, we're going back to you to do a project presentation.
You got it. Here we are. Of course, you're wondering, because you've been hearing a little bit about all of our interest in public space, in park, in bringing people out, community engagement. But you're probably wondering, what is it that you guys are actually trying to get going? So let me talk you through that. It'll probably take me 10 minutes or so. And then from there, it would be great to start thinking through your questions. So scribble them down while I'm talking. So first of all, what is an activation plan, or why an activation plan? The way we're looking at it is it can benefit the city in so many ways. It could improve health and mental health, by the way. It could help with equity issues. It could provide social connections and dialogue that is perhaps not always happening. One thing that is quite interesting, and I was just reading some of the comments in the chat, one approach could be to say, like, if you build it, they will come. Partially believe that. But it's not all about good design only. We'll talk about design in a minute. But if you have spaces, they often need a little help getting activated. And that's what we hope to do with this plan. And not only for perhaps what some of you may think for visitors or businesses or the city at large, but especially, of course, for individuals, for each of you on this call, and your neighbors, your friends. Important to draw people out over time. So it will be exciting to see. You probably wonder, what is the geographic area that you're actually looking at for these activations? And we'll tell you more about the activations in a minute, of course. You see the red firm line here, so not a dotted line. So on the north side and the south side, we'll be looking at these areas for activations. As you probably are well aware, some of these parts of the riverfront are more easily accessible than other parts. So this will definitely require some thinking on our side. It's like, how do you get people to all these spaces, and what will it take? And some of them, as you also know, are not even developed yet, and we'll talk about that also in a minute. So what will the activation plan include? What could include a ton of different things. But important to say first is, and I mentioned this earlier, but this is not only about big events. This is not only about big groups. But this is also very importantly about individuals coming to use the riverfront, sometimes on their own, sometimes just with a few family members, sometimes for something formal and planned, and in other cases, just very haphazard, last minute. So that means we need to activate in different ways. Temporary activations, permanent activations, stationary, mobile. Very important that there is a nice mix. And that mix will, of course, also include sports, culture, programs that are focused on well-being, and all leading, of course, to good mental and physical health. And for that, like, as we all know, food usually helps a ton, but also spaces just to, or like programs that allow you to just hang out. We're looking at this program strategy, this activation strategy, to help us through the next 5 to 10 years. But of course, any plan ideally is able to scale up, both in time as well as in geographic area. So we're looking at it with that in mind. Some examples here of what could be happening. And this is not so much about the designs, by the way, but much more about what you see people doing here. The sports I mentioned, people coming out for cultural events, some people just hanging out either as a group or on their own. And then food, of course, great important one always. I do think it's very important to acknowledge that you already have some great things happening on the river. It's like wonderful things happening already. The Riverside Arts Market, the fitness in the Corkscrew Park, the Yellow House Art Gallery, and very recently, of course, the great Jack's River Jams that were so well visited. So tons of interesting stuff already happening, and we'd like to build on that and from that, and not just for you, but also with you. And what we hope to get to eventually is a framework for these activities that I'm just mentioning, but also an indication of where certain activities could ideally be taking place. And this is not a framework for just activities in one season. The wonderful thing about being in Northern Florida is that you're very accessible year round, although some parts of the year a little hotter and humider than other parts, but nevertheless, we want to be able to use that. And as probably many of you know, being on different calls over the years or different meetings over the years, it was not always on Zoom, but there have been many plans for Jacksonville. Many of them were big master plans, big designs, lots of renderings, everything looking amazing. But not all of those, and perhaps even more so than not all of those, got executed. And what we're looking for here is not one of those like very complicated, very expensive plans that look especially good in renderings. What we're looking for here is a plan that is sustainable, maintainable, and that has the potential to grow over the years. And of course, with that, providing for lots of everyday activities for all residents and by all residents, because we believe if we can manage to get this all together, it would lead to amazing active citizenship for people in Greater Jacksonville, and especially, of course, also people living close to the riverfronts. And last but not least, I keep sometimes forgetting about it, but history is so important in any place, and especially in a place with so much interesting history as yours. So it will be great to look at that. Will be great to look into all the planning. This is not all about looking forward, but this is also about like acknowledging and acknowledging your past. So then, of course, the question is like, how do you build this up as a process? It's quite a process. You just heard from Katie and Gloria about the community engagement work. And we'll linger on that a little bit more in a few minutes. But there's also a very robust stakeholder engagement exercise already underway for the last few weeks. We've built out 3 groups listed here on the page, and I will show you the participants in each of these 3 groups in a minute. The first group that we're working with is what we call the task force. The names are almost arbitrary, perhaps they're all great. But this group is looking at what does it take to get this implemented and executed. So this is a group of people representing nonprofits, but also financial organizations, real estate, and politics. The second group is an activation coalition. This is a very large group with people representing local entities, especially located downtown, who are already providing programs, sometimes only in their venues, sometimes also in other places around the city. And those programs range, honestly, the gamut from art and food to culture and education, you name it. It's a great group. With them, we'll be working especially on like what could be great programming ideas, and also like what could it mean to collaborate on getting those programs going over time. Last but certainly not least is a group of people largely in their 20s. So this is a young group with people representing the arts, activism, media, hospitality. And with them, we're thinking through also program ideas, but especially with the lens on like, what does it mean to future-proof these ideas? What does it mean to create programs that could still be relevant towards the end of this framework and ideally beyond that? So I will briefly show you who is on the different groups. Some of you are here tonight. Thank you for joining. Good to see you again. And really interesting to work with you all. This is the task force, great group, smart people. First part of the activation coalition, there were so many people that didn't all fit on one slide. So here you get the next slide. And then the last group, the next gen group. So good to work with you all. The community engagement piece is something that Gloria just described, so we'll not say too much about it, but perhaps 2 brief points. One is, and Gloria and I have been chatting about it, and I know we're on the same page, is engagement is such an odd word, right? It's very passive. None of us quite like it. And it's much more about like creating initiatives or creating initiative. Allowing people to feel responsibility over spaces, allow people to feel responsibility of being involved, and also see it as an opportunity, have fun with it. So we've been really playing through that as we've thought through like what are the modules of community engagement. And for that reason, of course, there are the expected programs in all the spaces that Gloria mentioned, actual meetings, so sitting around tables, working through things together. But it's also very important to sometimes just have fun. And while you're having fun, learning something together, and that's where all the tours that Gloria described are coming from. And last but not least on this this page, there will be a big survey that we'll be issuing in the coming week, I believe. It's going out to Greater Jacksonville, and we'd love to get all of your input also through that survey beyond the input that you may be giving in the Q&A in a minute. Even though I'm talking a lot about activation, all types of interesting programs ranging from fun to functional, of course, there will be some needs for design, right? There's always small modules that you need, or thinking about how to get people to be in a space. There's no desire to do a complete overhaul of the riverfront, although things may happen, of course, in the coming decades. But as part of this plan, we're looking at especially at like, could there be small public space interventions? And for that, we're collaborating with WXY also on the call today. And WXY is a great design firm, architecture as well as landscape architecture, sometimes working at the biggest of scales and sometimes working at very small scale, like you see here in this kiosk in the bottom right. Just a small element that can give a boost to a public space and draw people in, could store elements for all types of programs, or for instance, provide coffee. You will see them in the different meetings over the coming months, a great group of people. And then among the last pieces that I'd like to show, and probably many of you know, actually everybody here now, definitely Gloria, but probably many of you listened to the Melissa Ross show, or First Coast Connect, hosted by Melissa Ross. Melissa has been very kind and is inviting people and topics related to this big exercise, the activation plan, into the show on a monthly basis for the coming months, for the full duration of the work. And in one of the sessions on May 4th, so a few weeks ago, Gloria and Anne-Marie Knight for UF Health Jacksonville were in the session. And Gloria, of course, made many good points, among which this one here, when we get together to talk about what we want and make decisions together, there's ownership. See, there we go again. And when there's ownership, there's success, because people want to see it succeed when it's for them. And Anne-Marie Knight, also good comments, said, like, if we look across our area, the average life expectancy is 61 years of age. But if we cross the bridge less than 5 miles away, it's 78 years of age. So that's in the San Marco area. And in Arlington, it's 77. If anyone thinks behavior and access don't play a role in these disparities, they are mistaken. So going back again to some of the issues we all mentioned earlier. So keep tuning in for the Melissa Ross show. We'll be making sure to list the guests for the Jacksonville Riverfront sections in the coming weeks. We have some interesting guests lined up. Definitely worth your time. Then I'm almost done, but it's always important to know about the timeline. What is the timeline for this process? We started it in for planning purposes a few weeks ago with some initial stakeholder meetings, as well as the benchmarking research that we're doing with Nancy Powell and Riverfront Parks now, including Ted Papas and Natalie Rosenberg. Great to collaborate with you also. Over the coming months, there will be tons of things going on, and Gloria describes all the community meetings. But what will be important also is to hopefully see all of you and friends that you hopefully will bring in the coming sessions in the general meetings. There will be a general public meeting again in July, and there will be a big meeting in October in which we'll be presenting the plans. Of course, all of you are welcome in the different community meetings. They're great to share your ideas in. So we hope to learn a lot from you while we're developing this rather robust plan. And then last, and then I will stop talking for a little while, is of course we're well aware that there's many ideas floating around, and some of them in a fairly formalized form on what the shipyards could be. Since we're already working on the activation plan for the full downtown riverfront, north and south side, and you saw that geographic zone a little earlier in the presentation, we felt like, okay, we are thinking through what it means to activate. We're bringing people together in different stakeholder groups, in different community sessions. Perhaps we should also do a little side part of this process and focus it on what could the shipyards also be. And what we're doing here is not developing a master plan, but WXY is looking at developing a conceptual space plan and looking at the different elements that could be going into the shipyards over the coming decades, reviewing the existing conditions, reviewing past and current plans, and there have been many past plans, as you know, and in that process, developing 3 scenarios in which we're playing out like the different options that could be relevant for conversations later this summer into the fall, and hopefully feed into the public debates. As part of that process, of course, there's a little bit more of a, or not a little bit, more of a design angle to the conversation. And as we already mentioned earlier, and also see appearing in the chat actively, there will be a serious focus on resiliency, of course. There will be a focus on how to connect the shipyards from the different neighborhoods to the riverfront. There would be a focus on what could it mean to look at mixed use developments, but also very importantly, how can we be sure that there's ample park space along the river? And what could we learn from the different activation strategies, both already developed as well as developed for our plan? And what needs to happen in terms of partnerships and coalition building to make this a place for everybody in Jacksonville. So that's a little side part of the process. And I know that many of you will want to talk about probably especially this part. But perhaps what we should do is move into the Q&A. And we'll divide it up into 2 sections. We'll focus the first part of the Q&A on the activation plan first. So what does it mean to bring activity to the full riverfront? And then we'll definitely want to spend some time with all of you in chatting through also the shipyard process that we're working on, and especially, of course, WXY. So with that, Maria will talk us through the process for the Q&A, and over to you, Maria.
Great, thank you, David. And thank you all so much for being very active in the chat. Just trying to keep up, and there's a lot in there, which is really great. This is definitely part of our process of getting gathering input from you all. So we will, be looking very seriously at everything you've put in there after the meeting as well. There will be time for questions now, but if we don't get to all of your questions, we'll certainly be looking at them and we'll follow up. We'll kind of try to consolidate the questions and do a follow-up that will be available on our website. We will also be sending a follow-up email. I just want to mention this right now, which will have all those dates for events and community meetings that Gloria mentioned, as well as other ways to be involved. We'll share the recording of this meeting as well. So just so you know that you didn't have to try to get all those dates written down as Gloria was telling you. So we definitely have a lot of comments and questions and great ideas in the chat right now. What we did want to do is to hear some voices and hear that you guys are out there. So we are going to use the raise hand function and take a few questions there. The raise hand function you will find if you open up. No, let me be sure I'm doing this right. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see that it says reactions to the right. And if you click on that, there is a raise hand function. So you can start doing that. I do have 2 things that has come up in the chat that I think maybe David or Mari can address to start with. First, David, there was just a question about defining what you mean by small public space interventions.
It can mean a lot, right? But it could be simple mobile units, for instance, that we bring in. Imagine like there could be a desire for food in many of your programs. Sometimes it could be with a food truck, but there's also many spaces on your Riverwalk that are not accessible by a food truck at all. So imagine a small cart that you could be wheeling in and could be using for instance, the food. So that could be on a mobile level, but it could also imagine like some lighter stationary elements that could be planted in different spots along the river to run all types of programming with and store goods, provide materials for perhaps like like a microphone and so on. So lots of different options. And I'm not even mentioning like all you could do with, for instance, public art and public installations, design installations. Could be so much fun.
Great. Thank you. And before we start hearing from people, there is another thing that had come up quite a lot. People want to hear what the visioning, or this is I'm paraphrasing Chat Scott's question from the chat, what the vision or background about promoting green space, trees, native plants, and using nature in parks to support biodiversity, cleaner water, cleaner air, cooling, and cooling the urban heat island effects, resiliency issues, the inevitable flooding along the riverfront, and how all of this will kind of be incorporated and thought about in our planning and the project.
You want me to take it or Mari?
David, why did you get started?
Okay, good. So as I said, like the activation plan is first focused on bringing energy and people to the river. That we're well aware, and I was actually in Jacksonville 10 days ago now, that many of your riverfront and your Riverwalk includes a lot of hard materials, pavers, concrete, and so on. So we'll definitely come up also with that in the intervention levels, like could there be ways to soften that? Could there be ways to green it? The Shipyards conceptual space plan, as I said, will have a very, very large green space in it, a park space in it. But nevertheless, of course, there is also a need there for some additional elements that will be a little harder, but all of those will be want to be wrapped in green space for sure. And then lastly, because you have some riverfront already developed, and I mentioned this earlier, but perhaps a slightly different way of phrasing things is looking at a process like this as a starting point and perhaps even a Trojan horse for future developments. Of course, some of you would say like, oh my God, can we do the whole riverfront over again? That's will take a while before that's possible. That's a big exercise. But think of this process and a joint usage of the riverfront as potentially also a starting point for perhaps some further development of green spaces along the river, the existing parts that you already know. And there's so much potential, like as long as everybody starts using it actively and starts seeing it as their spaces and spaces that should be welcoming, that should be green, and it should be great spaces.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I think we're ready to take the first question from the audience here. So I have Shannon Powell. So Shannon, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and pose your question.
Hi there. It really isn't a question. To be honest with you, it's a I have wholeheartedly bought into the idea. I'm a co-owner of Forever Lawn Jacksonville. We're a synthetic grass dealership, part of a network of dealers throughout North America, and you know, withhold your comments on artificial turf. It's changed and the industry is a lot different than it was, but I really actually would like to present a kind of a case study. And I'm sure the organizers are familiar with it, but that's the Tampa Riverwalk. We originally started in Tampa. We raised our boys in Tampa and we moved there in 1995. And, you know, when we used to pass through downtown to go to soccer games, it was tumbleweeds. My husband worked downtown during the week, but on the weekend, it was tumbleweeds. And then all of a sudden the focus became on it, and there is a vibrancy, there's a pride, there's an activity level that is unbelievable, enjoyment, and, you know, occasionally a championship trophy toss in the water there. You may have seen that. But, you know, the river through Tampa, honestly, is less impressive than Jacksonville, but it's 1,000 times more accessible. And what I mean by that is that, you know, it's a gathering space for people every day, every hour, not just for specific events. There's the Children's Museum, the Museum of Art. There's the Riverfront Park on one side and a Riverfront Park on the other, and they have event spaces and they have dog parks and they have playgrounds and splash pads, and there are restaurants, and there's Armature Works, a gathering space, and marinas, conference centers, water taxis, restoration and conservation projects ongoing all the time. So it's not like they're just trashing the river at all. It's realized that it's such a big part of the community. An example, we go to one of the food halls on an evening like tonight. The Lightning are getting ready to play in the playoffs. It'll be filled with people. And what will happen is 45 minutes before game time, they'll put on jerseys, they'll get on the city bikes, and they'll bike 3 miles on the riverfront to go to the arena to watch a hockey game, which means they're also biking back when it's over at night, and just enjoying that camaraderie and that feeling of it. We put dog parks under expressways to utilize underutilized space. There are pocket parks. For those of you who want to see native plants and calm, quiet green spaces in a big urban development, that's what's there now. It's taken years and years and years to get there, but it's so different from 20 years ago when it was just tumbleweeds in there. There are playgrounds and splash pads. There are restaurants, there are bars, I'm not getting paid, people, to sell this, but that's the vision. And I've seen that. You know, we used to live in Tampa, and now we're here in Jacksonville, and that would be spectacular. You can have family events, people of all ages and abilities. I'll do a little pitch for the turf. Yes, it's fake, but you can get a wheelchair, into a park, into a playground, into a dog park without having to push through sand or mulch or anything like that. There are very carefully thought about weights between concrete and grass and synthetic grass for event spaces that you want to last all year long without having mud to shut it down, and you can't have the Margarita Festival because it's too muddy. Well, now you can have those spaces. So it's carefully thought out and planned spaces. So it's just a way for Jacksonville to really get unique and put its stamp on something and develop a community feel that is just unbelievable. And I am excited actually to see what happens and how this evolves. So no question, I just did a huge endorsement. I'll send you a check. A bill.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you. Thank you. And we're going to move on to Carolyn. Thank you so much, Shannon, that we are definitely looking at Tampa and other examples. I think for raising the hand, just to be sure we have enough time, it would be good if you do have a question since we have time here all together. So do just put your, comments. You can put them in the chat and we'll definitely look at them later. But it would be good if you have a question in mind for the raise hand. Carolyn, I see you next, Carolyn.
Okay. I was down at the riverfront at 6:30 this morning, and there were a lot of people down there even at that early hour. And I know it's because it gets hot later in the day. People are already using the riverfront, even though it looks horrible and it's concrete and it's just a mess down there. I think that if we clean it up and make some nice green spaces, we don't have to worry about always having activities, always having something planned to do. I think people will plan their own things. My question is, if we are presented with 3 potential plans, and we have to choose, are we going to be thinking none of these? We don't want any of them. I'm looking at all these chat messages, and everybody is saying trees, green space, and David is saying activities, concrete. And I'm really seeing a disconnect. So that's my question.
I don't think you completely followed my conversation or my explanation. So that's a shame on my side, right? I actually actively said that I don't believe in all of your concrete, but we're also not the city, right? And we're trying to make sure to bring a lot of activity to the riverfront to make sure that your legislators, your potential funders in the city start realizing there is so much more potential to the riverfront. So that's the full riverfront, the downtown riverfront, and that potential could and should include a lot more green space than you currently have there. Then where I think you're probably mistaken is the shipyards. So only the shipyards will get 3 conceptual space plans. This is slightly outside of the rest of the process. And as you probably also know, there's different entities working in the city at the moment on actual master plans for the shipyards. What we'd like to do with our 3 conceptual space plans is make sure that there is a healthy conversation around what the shipyards could become. It's not the goal necessarily for you to pick one of these 3 plans, but to make sure that there is a conversation around these 3 plans and other plans that may or may not be getting developed right now. And of course, there's lots of opportunities for instance, all the 3 plans on our side. There could be lots of overlap, there could be combo plans and so forth, but they're especially there to make sure that there's a healthy conversation about what could be happening on the shipyards.
Thank you. So we did have a question from the chat that I wanted to pose, and I actually forget who it came from that I copied it out. But there's a question about what is the role of city staff, city council, and downtown investment authority in this planning process, and the role of the major riverfront landowners.
Sure, and I'll take that, David. So we are in close conversation with DIA, Parks and Rec, with the mayor's office, with the parking people, all these different dimensions of city administration that have an impact on how we use the waterfront. We are, of course, in conversation with every single one of the riverfront businesses and or organizations, and that includes like the Jacksonville Symphony or the YMCA. We are in conversations with every single one of them. And we are, of course, in conversation with Riverfront Parks Now, with Scenic Jacksonville, with its members. We are in conversation with CDCs. I think I saw Suzanne's name on here, but we are not just talking to the East Side. Hi, Suzanne. We're not just talking to the East Side CDC. We're also talking to other CDCs in other parts of town that are perhaps a little bit further away from the riverfront, but nonetheless have input about how their residents might be able to use the riverfront space. So we're trying as best as possible to stay in close touch with all of these stakeholders.
Great, thank you. I think there was just a need to clarify when we're talking about the shipyards, we're talking about both shipyards, metropolitan parks, kids campus, and festival lawn spaces, the space. So just a clarification on that. I think we're ready for a question from Susan. I see you're here. Good to see you.
Oh, thank you. I live on San Marco, and we have a river walk going along the river in the south side near San Marco. But if you drive along Prudential Drive, you would have no idea there was a river there. And there are almost no parking places to use that river walk. That river walk is along a wall of tall buildings. There's not a tree to sit under because the land was given away up to the river edge, and the river walk is over the river. So there's not a room for a food truck. There's not a place to get a cup of coffee. There's not a restroom facility available. And that's what we have downtown as a river walk. The North Bank River Walk along Riverside Avenue is a wall of buildings also with a small, I mean, we're thrilled to have a river walk, but it's not large enough to bike on and cycle on, I mean, to cycle on, to walk a dog. And there's no place, no bathroom facilities, no place to eat, no place to go. And thus they have not been a magnet. They brought very few people downtown except for inveterate, joggers, but it's not a place to gather and enjoy the river. It's not a place to feel like you are in a wonderful spot that you love downtown Jacksonville. It's a place to go. It is. So we just hope that our remaining property, one of the last bits of public property on our beautiful river, the 1,100 miles of river, can be used for all of the city to use, to let's join St. Petersburg. And the mayor says the jewel of their waterfront is what makes the sun shine in St. Petersburg. I would love to be able to say that about Jacksonville. Our jewel of our waterfront is what makes the sun shine in Jacksonville. Thank you.
Susan, good to see you, and I fully agree. It's very important to make sure that, especially that shipyard thinking does all these things that you're saying. But I do think it would be good, and I think that's hidden in your comments, to also be more bold in the coming decades about like what can be expected and what you want to expect from some of these existing spaces. They have a ton of potential. But right now, some of them are really unfriendly.
Yeah, that's the point. They're very unfriendly.
Thank you, Susan. So I see Barbara has her hand raised. Barbara, are you ready to go next?
Yes, hello, thank you. I hear you talk a lot about parks in the plural, and obviously there are multiple green spaces that exist now, and then a whole lot of potential. I think there are many of us, particularly those of us, and that's the majority, who are concerned about resiliency, trees, green space. We know our river is going to flood. We've got sea level rise. We really need to think about resiliency in our city. I'm not hearing you talk about a significant destination park along our riverfront. And it seems to me that's what we really need to be talking about. And I didn't hear that in the presentation so far. So I'd like to hear what your thinking is about actually developing a destination park along our riverfront. Thanks.
I think you may have dialed a little late into the meeting, Barbara, but it's great to get your question because it's good to reiterate. For especially the work in the shipyards, it will be so important to have a big green space. So there's definitely a lot of thinking going into that. On top of that, and it goes back to Susan's point and some of the other points, I do think there is a lot of opportunity, perhaps at first through interventions, perhaps eventually in other ways, but there's a lot of opportunity in the existing river parts of the Riverwalk to add green space also.
And Barbara, if I can add, we could recommend that there be a destination park, but then we would need to work with the city to make sure that there are funds to build such a park, to maintain such a park, etc. But I did actually notice some people who are working on the former landing, now called Riverfront Plaza, on the call. So sorry if I outed you. So I know there are 3 excellent design firms working on the public space in arguably the most prominent public space in downtown proper. If you sort of discount that Metropolitan is pretty far away from the core of downtown. And so there's already design work underway, and we are trying to work very closely with them as with all the designers and stay in touch with what they're thinking.
Mari, could I just respond? I'm aware of that, but my understanding from DIA is that a significant part of the green space that is there right now is actually set aside to be built on. And so the amount of green space left is going to be significantly reduced. So I'm concerned that the landing is not actually able to be the kind of destination park that I think some of us would very much like to see along the riverfront. So I'm not saying it won't be well designed. I think a number of us concerned that there's actually building going to take place on it, and that's more concrete, and a concern about that. So I just share that as one additional concern, but I appreciate your response.
Absolutely. And perhaps I should have said at the outset, I do believe well-designed public spaces enhance and complement private investment, and that there is a way mixed-use spaces are incredibly vibrant all over the world. So hopefully we can get that mix right here too.
Thank you. So we're running out of time, unfortunately. I know there are a lot of more questions in the chat, and I just want to reiterate that we will be looking through all of your questions and all of your comments, and we will be answering the questions, consolidating them and answering them, posting them on the website. We only have time for one more question. I do want to be sure that Scott gets a chance to pose a question, but that will be the last one. But again, we will be following up with, I know that there are a lot more questions in the chat.
Thanks for your time. I'll be fairly short, but my question is just about the resiliency aspect. So a couple specific questions would be, who's responsible for kind of quantifying how much green space there should be, considering if a hurricane or flood or rising sea level comes up, who's assessing that risk? Is it the city? Is it the design firm? Who's kind of responsible for that? And the second thing is, how can that be quantified in maybe economic value? And is that being sought out on this early stage of the design?
Thank you, Scott. To find your image again, you were floating around. Good question. On the design team side, so WXY working with us, will definitely make some serious suggestions for the resiliency piece on the shipyards scenarios. Of course, in the end, the responsibility sits with the city, right? So there will definitely need to be many conversations in the coming years with the city on like what is not only the need for resiliency planning, but also the potential benefit. And that benefit sits on many levels, ranging from the expected to also, for instance, there could be fun sides to it, sites to visit on the weekends or during the day for that matter. So there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think it's very good that you bring it up. We're very eager to push this into the conversations through this process, and I know that many others, and some of them on the call here, including, for instance, Nancy Powell for Riverfront Parks Now, are very working very hard on bringing this narrative into the Jacksonville ecosystem.
Thank you. So we're at 7 p.m. Mara, do you want to close us out?
I'll just repeat, thank you so much for the gift of your time. It's 7 o'clock. The vast majority of you hung out here with us on this incredibly large Zoom webinar. It's not even a webinar, it's an actual meeting. I don't think I've been in a Zoom meeting this large before. So kudos to you for hanging out here and watching us talk. I so appreciate all the questions in the chat and all the comments. There's so much excitement. We'll try our best to leverage all of that energy. And stay tuned, because we will be getting back in touch with you with some of the answers, as well as additional opportunities to interact like this. So thank you very much. Good night.